After his first marriage, Oscar decided for himself that he would no longer commit to a relationship. There were many women in his life, but each of them never stayed with him for more than a month. Oscar was a big business owner who didn't need the money. Women led around him constantly, and the man had no shortage of them. Why did Oscar come to believe that relationships weren't for him? His first wife left him for another less successful man. She fell in love and lost her head. Oscar's breakup was painful. His only joy at the time was his 15-year-old daughter Sabrina, with whom he had many interests in common. That all changed overnight when a friend asked him out on a double date. "Kosty, I'm not a boy," he laughed at his friend's idea, but Kosty still persuaded him to go together. And that day, Oscar met love. She was 23, yesterday's student hakhatushka. Rose looked like a magazine picture. A chiseled figure, plump lips, and incredible blue eyes in which Oscar and drowned. Rose and her friend entertained themselves by going on dates with rich men who could afford to entertain young women and not deny them anything. They got into it when they were students and didn't plan to stop, but for Rose, a new phase in life was beginning. A relationship with Oscar. Oscar suddenly fell head over heels in love and showered her with bouquets and fruit baskets. They went on dates, and he helped every whim of his beloved. Rose's friend was jealous and stopped communicating with her. No man ever showed her such signs of attention. Oscar laughed at his friend. After all, if Kosty had not dragged him on a double date at the time, he might never have met such a beautiful woman. Kosty didn't appreciate the joke and behind his back condemned Oscar for choosing a young floozy as a life partner, an act frankly not the smartest. The man was convinced that a relationship with such young women could only be a one-time thing, no seriousness. The first time Rose had mentioned to her suitors what kind of wedding she wanted for the next holiday, she received from him a ring and a proposal of marriage. Shrieking happily, the woman accepted the gift and immediately started bragging about it on her social networking page. The wedding was gorgeous. Every remark from the bride, who was fiddling as best she could, was taken into account. Her husband-to-be gave her carte blanche, and Rose did not deny herself anything. Oscar's daughter from her first marriage became her maid of honor. Sabrina and Rose did not become friends right away. The stepmother-to-be was gaining her stepdaughter's trust, and in the end she won. The girl fell in love with her. They lived for 2 happy years, not hoping for each other's soul. The man was glad that the beloved was able to make friends with his daughter. They often vacationed together, somewhere, and all was well. Oscar had no idea that their perfect marriage could give a crack that would separate them forever. He did not limit Rose in any way. The woman was completely left to herself, did what she wanted. Oscar was glad that his wife did not sit on the spot all day or sit idle in the beauty salons. Rose had several hobbies that she did. The man never missed a chance to brag about how beautiful his wife was, but his friends begged him not to take his wife lightly. The men all said it was trouble when a woman knew no limits to her freedom. Oscar preferred not to listen to them, trusting in Rose, for which he soon paid the price. One day at work, a secretary routinely brought Oscar letters addressed to him personally. He leafed through them, put them aside, unimportant ones, and suddenly noticed an unusual envelope. It had no stamps, no sender's address, and was surprisingly puffy. Before Oscar could think it might be something bad, he had already automatically torn the top off. The envelope contained photographs, the quality of which was not great, but in general, it was possible to see the objects depicted on the cards. With each photo he looked at, the man became more and more frowning. He flipped through 15 pictures in a circle, examining each one in detail. Goosebumps ran down his back and sweat broke out on his forehead. How he wished he had been wrong at this moment, how he wished his eyesight had failed him, and that in fact, the woman in front of him in the greasy pictures was another woman and not his beloved wife. Oscar looked out into the hallway and sternly asked the receptionist who had brought the envelope in question, The girl was frightened and shook her head. Correspondence and letters she picked up from security in the morning. She could not know who it was. The security guard was an older gray-haired man who scrolled his boss the video camera footage that morning. The envelope was placed by some boy, about 16, clearly a fake. Oscar was never able to find out who gave it to him. In his office, he looked at the pictures until his eyes hurt. The man was completely unable to work. All his thoughts were consumed by Rose. The pictures showed her with a man unknown to Oscar. Because of the quality of the cards, it was impossible to make out the age of the man, but it was clearly visible what the two were doing. Oscar wondered who could give him such a gift of revealing his wife's infidelity, and with clear evidence. Rose wouldn't have a chance to get away and cheat on her husband again. He had pictures that would not let him lie, the cheater. He didn't come home immediately that day. He didn't take his car after work, called a cab, and headed to a bar, where he drank himself into a state of insanity, pouring out his heartache. He called Kosty, with whom he had fallen out since any marriage they had had. It didn't take long for his friend to come to Oscar's rescue as fast as he could. He wasn't able to talk to his spouse until the next morning, when the man was able to collect himself after a stormy night, his head splitting on his soul scrambling. He had no idea how to start a conversation with Rose. His wife was doing something in the kitchen when he woke up to finally wash off the traces of the sleepless night. Oscar climbed into the shower and stood under the lines and cold water for a long time, trying to come to his senses. He couldn't think of anything better to do than just put the envelope containing the creepy pictures on the table and wait for his wife's reaction. Rose, taking the pictures in her hands, went pale, her eyes widened, and she herself seemed to shrink into a lump of fear. She looked frightened at her husband. He had no strength to swear at her. Her head hurt a lot. They looked at each other in silence. Well, Oscar finally squeezed himself out. "Will you tell me something?" "Honey," the woman whispered and cried. "I thought you wouldn't know." Rose confusedly told him about her lover. Oscar knew him casually, and on several occasions they crossed paths on business. The man listened and sincerely did not understand what his wife lacked in her marriage to him. She had everything. Rose never complained that she was not satisfied with anything. So why? He had no answer to that question, so he asked it of his wife. "I don't know. It was spontaneous," she mumbled. Now in the midst of the divorce proceedings, Oscar was glad he had listened to Kosty and drawn up a prenuptial agreement before the wedding. Of course, he didn't leave Rose with nothing. Well, she didn't get much. When the divorce certificate was in the hands of the ex-spouses, Rose suddenly received her first ever phone call from the same friend with whom she had once gone on double dates. At first her voice was so sweet and kind, and then the woman suddenly laughed angrily. "Well, it serves you right for thinking you could get away with having 2 chairs to sit on." The words hurt Rose and made her sick. Rose was surprised by her ex-girlfriend's reaction. It turned out that she was the one who, after learning that her friend was cheating on her husband, had hired a boy to spy on her and take pictures, after which she gave them to Anatoly with the help of the same boy. The woman was shocked at the behavior of the man she trusted. They had known each other for many years, and she had never expected her friend to harbor such a grudge against her. With the same man, with the picture of a long relationship, did not work out. He had a family of his own, and he had no plans to marry Rose. He was only interested in her as a lover. She was able to marry only 7 years after the parting with Oscar, but the woman was unhappy in her marriage. She regretted her missed happiness, but nothing could be changed. The next story is even more interesting. I'd advise you to watch until the end. Alice and Stan met at Stan's friend's anniversary party. Alice was invited there as the girlfriend of one of the birthday boy's friends. At the time, she had only been dating her date for a couple of months and hadn't bet anything on the relationship. The man seemed unreliable to her, and she herself wasn't eager to create anything more serious with him. When Stan asked her to a slow dance, there was a spark between them. After the birthday party, they started chatting on social media, dropping off each other's favorite music and telling each other how their day was going. As soon as the man found out that Alice had broken up with her suitor, he went on the offensive, and very quickly the couple got married. For their wedding, Stan's mother gave the newlyweds a glass table for something. Alice did not like it at once, but neither of the newlyweds could throw away the gift. So they put the chair in the far corner, and often it was filled with things. The new wife wondered all the time why she had to give such a specific gift. And Stan laughed back and said she should be grateful it wasn't something even stranger. The man knew that his mother was a woman of unusual tastes, and therefore understood that an ugly glass table was not the worst gift. Stan worked in shifts. His profession as a surveying engineer was in demand, and he received a good salary, spoiling his beloved even when he was out of town. At least once a week, his wife received not only a money transfer to the card, but also some kind of surprise, a bouquet of flowers or delivery of favorite food. Back then, the man didn't know what kind of snake he had nested on his chest and what his absence would do to him. He did not know that his wife was having an affair with her colleague. Alice herself didn't fully understand how it happened. A new co-worker came to them and began overtly paying attention to her. She was hungry for her husband and suddenly reciprocated. The woman lied shamelessly, looking into her husband's eyes. And her lover, at the same time, was washing in her shower after another lovemaking session. Alice was ashamed in front of Stan, but she justified herself that it was only for a couple of times, until her husband came back and never again. When Stan returned from that very unfortunate business trip, during which his wife was having fun with another man, he was surprised to find that almost all the things from Alice's unloved desk had moved to the floor in complete disarray. It seemed to him that his wife had started to clean up and hadn't finished it. He wanted to call her and ask her about it or offer his help in cleaning, but decided to do it later when his spouse returned from work. After the long drive, Stan's favorite resting place was the bathroom. Alice had accustomed her husband, in spite of all his protests, to take it according to all the rules with fragrant foam and salt. So, coming home today, the man thought it was impossible to betray tradition and put the tub to soak, while he himself went to the kitchen to make himself a big mug of tea. He was already anticipating that pleasant moment of relaxation in hot water. He opened the trash can to throw out the package from the tea bag and froze. At first, Stan thought he was imagining things and what he was seeing was a trick of seeing. He grabbed the first fork he could find from the table and buried it in the bucket. His heart beat frantically and then fell somewhere down. Stan broke out in a sweat. He wasn't imagining it, and it wasn't a trick of seeing. The bucket that Alice had apparently forgotten to take out before work contained the torn foil wrapper and the contraceptive itself. The throbbing in his head made Stan unable to hear his own thoughts. He remained frozen in that pose, slowly opening and closing his eyes. The realization did not want to come to him. He was roused from his daze by the sound of water running over the edge of the tub. He hastily wiped away the after effects of the flood, still not quite sure what to do next. To somehow cope with the heavy burden, Stan grabbed cigarettes from the shelf and went to the balcony. In the hall, where the glass table hated by the couple stood, the midday light was developing, dimmed by the curtains. The wind rattled the curtains and a beam of light appeared on the table, then disappeared from it. Stan noticed that there were some prints on the dust that had settled on the surface of the table for months. As he approached, he saw the tracks of a man's clearly male palms and 2 semicircles. His eyes darkened with anger, and Stan grabbed a stool near the wall, swung it up, and hit the table with all his might, the sound of shattered glass. The tabletop crumbled to the floor, leaving an orphaned metal base. The man breathed heavily. With anger, he began randomly grabbing things and throwing them against the wall. The picture frame with their wedding photo, the remote from the TV set, Alice's favorite vase, which her mother had given her, flew there. When Stan came to his senses and looked indifferently at the destruction, he lit a cigarette. Alice returned home, and had no idea what awaited her there. She had completely forgotten that she had not cleaned up the traces of the crime she had committed. Her mind was at peace. Stan was back. Now they would order food delivery, open a bottle of wine, and have a nice evening. Her plans were not destined to come true. As soon as Alice opened the door to the apartment, she saw a lot of things scattered around. The woman was frightened that they had been robbed, and without taking her shoes off, she rushed to check the rooms. In the kitchen, she saw Stan. He was sitting at an empty table with only a bottle of vodka and a shot glass. He had had half of it and was quite drunk. What happened? Alice screamed. Her husband looked at her hazy. "We'll have to ask you that." Stammering, he said, "You had a surprise for me." A cold sweat broke out over Alice. Suddenly, she realized she'd forgotten to take out the trash this morning. "I'll explain everything," she began, but at that moment, Stan slammed his fist on the table, so that the shot glass pitifully winked out of the bottle. "What can you explain to me? How you waited for your husband?" "Yes, I saw everything." Alice thought he was about to hit her, and so she backed away. But Stan, even though he was drunk, held himself together. For a long time afterwards, Alice begged her husband to forgive her. She cried so much and kept repeating that it was a mistake that would never happen again, that at some point Stan gave up. Deep down, he still loved his wife and found the strength to forgive her. The couple lived together for almost 5 more years and even had a daughter. They went through a new moment of adjustment to each other, because Stan needed time to start trusting his wife again. But it didn't work out the way it did before. The rift that had lain between them on that fateful day grew in size with each passing day and drove the couple apart. On his 37th birthday, Stan told his wife that he could no longer deceive himself or her. He wanted to leave the family. Alice accepted her husband's decision. Deep down, she knew it might happen one day. Her mistake had greatly undermined them as a couple. After the divorce, neither of them found a new relationship anymore. Alice and her daughter moved to live with her mother, and Stan decided to try to start a new life in the next town over. He knew that his ex-wife had twice tried to date other men, but her mother had facilitated their separation each time. The ex-mother-in-law didn't want her granddaughter to be raised by a strange man off the street, so she talked her daughter out of the relationship in every way possible. For years, Alice remained an unhappy, lonely woman whose only joy was her daughter. That's the story. Share in the comments what you think about this situation and the behavior of the characters.